Right now, a white scar is climbing the canyon walls above Lake Mead. It marks every single foot of water that has vanished over the last 23 years. And scientists have just confirmed what water managers have been quietly terrified to say out loud. This mega-drought reality is not ending. It is just getting started. Over 40 million people across 7 states drink from this one lake. Las Vegas already spent $1.4 billion drilling a tunnel 3 miles through solid rock just to keep the water running. The conservation is working, the engineering is extraordinary, and the lake is still disappearing. But here is the part that should stop you cold. Researchers did not need satellites or supercomputers to see this coming. The warning was already written inside the rings of ancient trees, recording centuries of droughts so severe they collapsed entire civilizations that once depended on this same river. The megadrought that drained Lake Mead to 26% capacity in 2022? According to that data, it may not have been a crisis at all. It may have been a preview. So the real question is, if the worst is still ahead, did anyone actually build enough to survive it? Las Vegas was never supposed to exist. Not here. Not at this size. Not in the middle of one of the most unforgiving stretches of desert on the entire North American continent. The Mojave delivers an average of 4 inches of rain per year. Summer temperatures crack 115 degrees Fahrenheit with routine indifference. The ground beneath the city is dry, cracked, and ancient. There are no rivers running through it, no natural lakes within reach, no underground aquifers large enough to sustain a city of any real size. By every measurement nature has ever offered, this was a place where a major city simply could not survive. And yet, more than 2.3 million people call it home today. In 1940, Las Vegas was a railroad town of roughly 8,000 residents. Modest, dusty, easy to overlook. Then came the casinos, the highways, the air conditioning, and the American appetite for reinvention. The population exploded in ways that urban planners had never modeled and water managers had never prepared for. By the 1970s, the city was growing faster than almost anywhere else in the country. By the 1990s, it had become one of the fastest expanding metro areas in American history. Today, the Las Vegas Valley welcomes 40 million tourists every single year and shows absolutely no signs of slowing down. Every single one of them needs water. The city consumes approximately 300,000 acre-feet of water per year. That is nearly 98 billion gallons. To put that number in terms that actually mean something, it is enough water to submerge the entire island of Manhattan under 3 feet of liquid every single year. And nearly 90% of every drop comes from one place. Lake Mead, fed by the Colorado River. That is not a backup plan or a secondary source. That is the only plan. The Southern Nevada Water Authority, the agency responsible for keeping Las Vegas alive, manages this impossible equation every single day. Their entire operation depends on a reservoir stretching across the Nevada-Arizona border, built during an era when the Colorado River seemed limitless. It was not limitless. It never was. The Colorado River Compact, signed in 1922, divided the river's water among 7 states based on flow measurements taken during some of the wettest decades in the region's recorded history. Scientists now know those measurements were dangerously optimistic. The agreement allocated more water than the river actually produces in most years. That single miscalculation has been quietly accumulating for an entire century. Las Vegas inherited a water future built on a flawed foundation. A booming city, a shrinking river, a single lake standing between 2.3 million people and catastrophe. And the lake was already starting to disappear. For most of the 20th century, Lake Mead looked permanent, immovable. A guaranteed fact of the American West, as certain as the canyon walls surrounding it. The Colorado River flowed, the reservoir filled, and the cities downstream drank without much thought about what would happen if any of that ever changed. Then, in the early 2000s, the lake began to drop. Slowly at first, quietly, almost imperceptibly. Most people did not notice. The water managers noticed. Through the 2010s, the decline accelerated. Year after year, the lake fell further than projections anticipated and recovered less than models predicted. The gap between how much water was flowing in and how much was being pulled out was not dramatic in any single year. It was relentless across every year, compounding like interest on a debt that no one wanted to acknowledge. By 2021, the federal government could no longer look away. Water managers declared the first ever official shortage on the Colorado River, a designation that triggered mandatory water allocation cuts across multiple states simultaneously. It was the first time in the river's managed history that the system had formally admitted it could not deliver what it had promised. By July 2022, Lake Mead had dropped to just over 26% of its total capacity, the lowest level ever recorded since the reservoir first filled in the 1930s. A lake that once stretched 247 square miles and plunged 532 feet at its deepest point was hollowing out from the inside. The numbers were stark. The visuals were something else entirely. Boat docks sat stranded hundreds of feet from the water's edge, their ramps descending uselessly into cracked, bleached lakebed. A bathtub ring of white mineral deposits climbed the canyon walls like a geological scar, marking every foot the lake had surrendered. Ghost structures began reappearing from the exposed lake floor. Submerged roads, old foundations, the ruins of St. Thomas, a resort town that had sat underwater since 1938, rising back into daylight as the water retreated. Lake Mead was not just shrinking, it was revealing its own history as it disappeared. Intake number 1, built in 1971 at an elevation of 1,050 feet, was now operating dangerously close to its functional limit. Intake number 2, added in 1993 as an insurance policy against exactly this possibility, was never designed for a lake at these depths. Both pipes were engineered for a world where the Colorado River delivered what the 1922 Compact had promised. That world was gone. Inside the Southern Nevada Water Authority, the internal alarm was no longer quiet. The city that should never have existed was now staring directly at a future its original engineers had never once imagined having to plan for. The plan was audacious, the execution was nearly impossible, and the price tag, when it finally came due, made even the most hardened infrastructure veterans go quiet. Engineers at the Southern Nevada Water Authority had a single objective: build a third intake pipe positioned so deep beneath Lake Mead's surface that no drought in recorded history could ever reach it. Not close to the bottom, below it, through the bedrock underneath the lake bed itself, reaching water at an elevation of 860 feet, lower than dead pool, lower than anything either existing intake could touch, lower than any municipal water intake ever constructed in the United States. To get there, they would need to drill a tunnel 3 miles long through solid volcanic basalt, some of the hardest rock on the continent, while working hundreds of feet below an active reservoir holding trillions of gallons of water directly overhead. Construction began in 2008. From the very first day, nothing was easy. A massive tunnel boring machine, nicknamed Sandy by the crews who operated her, was assembled underground and set to work grinding through the basalt layer by layer. Sandy measured 23 feet in diameter, wide enough to drive 2 vehicles side by side through the finished tunnel. She was precise, powerful, and still completely unprepared for what the geology had waiting. Unexpected rock formations forced crews to stop and recalculate. Equipment broke down under pressures that engineering models had underestimated. Water seeped through fissures in the rock, threatening to flood active sections of the tunnel before sealing work could catch up. The heat underground was relentless. Workers operated in confined spaces, deafened by the grinding of steel against ancient volcanic stone, acutely aware that an active lake sat directly above their heads. Project engineers described the operation as threading a needle through a mountain, blindfolded, underwater, with no margin for error. Sandy completed her run in 2014. The tunnel was sealed, tested, and declared operational in 2015. The engineering had worked. The impossible had been built. Then came the bill. $1.4 billion. The most expensive municipal water infrastructure investment in American history, paid entirely by the residents and businesses of southern Nevada, through steadily rising water rates that climbed year after year as construction dragged on and costs mounted. Las Vegas households watched their water bills rise, not because they were using more water, but because they were paying for the tunnel being drilled beneath the lake, keeping them alive. Critics were immediate and loud. Environmental groups argued the third straw sent exactly the wrong message, that Las Vegas could keep growing because the engineering would always find a way to keep up. The Water Authority answered simply. They do not plan for optimistic scenarios. In the desert, the worst case has a way of arriving ahead of schedule. The satellites confirmed the crisis. The engineers measured it. The water managers lived it every single day. But the most unsettling evidence did not come from any modern instrument. It came from trees. Dendrochronology is the science of reading climate history encoded inside tree rings. Every year a tree grows, it adds a new ring. A wide ring means a wet year, abundant water, generous conditions. A narrow ring means drought, stress, survival. Centuries of rings stacked inside a single trunk become a detailed record of everything the climate did long before humans were measuring it. Researchers across the Colorado River Basin have analyzed thousands of these records, cross-referencing ancient trees to build a continuous climate history stretching back over 1,000 years. What that history reveals should stop every water manager in the American West cold. The Colorado River Basin has experienced megadroughts before. Not dry spells lasting a few years, droughts lasting decades. Sustained, civilization-crushing dry periods far more severe and far longer than anything captured in the modern instrumental record. The 20-year stretch that drained Lake Mead to 26% of capacity was not unprecedented in that longer timeline. It was not even particularly unusual. Droughts of equal or greater intensity appear in the tree ring record multiple times across the past millennium. Entire cultures that depended on this river system collapsed under conditions the modern era has not yet seen. The ruins they left behind are still out there, occasionally resurfacing from the lake bed as the water retreats. The 20-year dry stretch may not have been an anomaly. It may have been a preview. Then came the winter of 2022 to 2023, and for a moment, it felt like relief. Record-breaking snowpack buried the Rocky Mountains. Snow levels in the upper Colorado River Basin exceeded seasonal averages by extraordinary margins. As temperatures warmed through spring, that snowpack released slowly, feeding rivers and streams that eventually drained toward Lake Mead. The reservoir rose more than 20 feet in a single year. Lake Powell, sitting upstream, gained more than 50 feet in the same period. The Bureau of Reclamation scrapped its decline projections entirely and rewrote its outlook from the ground up. Scientists urged immediate caution. One exceptional snow year, they warned, does not rewrite 20 years of structural overuse. The lake remained more than 160 feet below full capacity. The recovery was real. It was also fragile, weather-dependent, and built on conditions that climate models suggest will become increasingly rare. The third straw reaches water at 860 feet elevation. That number was chosen with great care, but the Colorado River has a harder limit. Full dead pool sits at 895 feet. Below that threshold, the tunnel still exists, but the water it was built to reach does not. Drilling deeper was only half the strategy. The other half was using less. Las Vegas understood early that engineering alone could not solve a math problem this severe. A city consuming 98 billion gallons of water per year, drawing from a shrinking lake in a desert growing hotter every single decade. No tunnel, no matter how deep, could outrun those numbers forever. So alongside the third straw, the Southern Nevada Water Authority built something equally ambitious. Not a pipe, not an intake structure, not another feat of engineering that would take years to drill and billions to fund. They built a culture, and the results are genuinely remarkable. Since 2002, Las Vegas has cut its per capita water consumption by more than 40%. Not despite population growth, during it. The metro area added hundreds of thousands of residents over that same period and still managed to use less total water than it did 2 decades ago. By any honest measurement, it is one of the most dramatic urban conservation turnarounds in American history. The mechanics behind that number are deliberate and far-reaching. Las Vegas recycles approximately 99% of its indoor water. Treated wastewater discharged back into Lake Mead earns the city return flow credits, which count directly against its annual Colorado River allocation. Every gallon used indoors and returned to the system is effectively used twice. It is an elegant solution to an impossible equation, and no other major American city does it at the same scale. Outdoor water is where the real battle was fought. Nevada passed legislation banning ornamental grass, the decorative turf lining medians, surrounding office parks, and covering suburban front yards, without serving any functional purpose whatsoever. The removal program is estimated to save approximately 6 billion gallons of water annually. 6 billion gallons that used to evaporate under a merciless desert sun, serving no purpose except appearance. Residential water use became the next frontier. Nevada proposed legislation giving water authorities the power to cap household consumption at roughly 163,000 gallons per year, the first regulation of its kind anywhere in the United States. Residents pushed back hard, but the underlying logic was undeniable. When a resource is genuinely finite, unlimited individual consumption is not a right the system can continue to afford. Regional cooperation added another critical layer. Tucson, Arizona, voluntarily reduced its Lake Mead allocations, forgoing water it was legally entitled to take. Federal compensation programs incentivized other cities across the basin to follow. The Colorado River Compact renegotiation, with its 2026 deadline now pressing close, forced 7 states into difficult and overdue conversations about sharing a river that no longer produces what the original document promised. Las Vegas had changed everything it could change, and the lake was still not safe. The tunnel is built, the conservation is working, the lake has partially recovered, and none of it is enough. The third straw solved one specific problem with extraordinary precision. It reached water that 2 existing pipes could not touch. It secured access to depths that no drought in the modern record had ever threatened. But solving the immediate problem of where to put the intake pipe is a very different thing from solving the desert. And the desert does not negotiate. Dead pool math is brutally simple. Full dead pool sits at an elevation of 895 feet above sea level. Below that threshold, no water can physically flow past Hoover Dam under any conditions. The pumps still work. The tunnel is still intact. The third straw still reaches its intake point at 860 feet. But if the lake drops below 895 feet, the water that intake was built to reach is simply no longer there. The engineering marvel sitting beneath the lake floor becomes an extraordinarily expensive reminder of how precisely a solution can be designed and still fall short. The third straw bought access to the bottom of the lake. It did not buy the water itself. Beneath the surface, a separate threat is quietly building. As Lake Mead's levels rise and fall dramatically with each cycle of drought and recovery, sediments on the lake bed are disturbed and remobilized. Those sediments carry heavy metals and toxic residues accumulated from decades of mining operations and industrial activity along the shoreline. When the water rises, it floods old contamination sites that were considered safely contained when submerged and stable. When levels drop, those same sites are exposed and disrupted again. The third straw secures access to water at depth. It does not guarantee the quality of what comes through it. Then there is the problem that no single city can engineer its way around. 40 million people across 7 states depend on the Colorado River. Las Vegas is not the only city watching this lake. Phoenix draws from the same system. Los Angeles pulls from the same allocation. Farmers across Arizona and California irrigate with water the river can no longer consistently deliver. Federal proposals to bypass Glen Canyon Dam entirely, rerouting flow to restore some function to a river system being consumed faster than it can replenish, reflect how fundamentally the thinking has already shifted. The infrastructure built for one era is being reconsidered for a completely different one. The Southern Nevada Water Authority plans for worst-case scenarios because the worst case keeps arriving ahead of schedule. The third straw cost $1.4 billion, took 7 years to build, and answered the question of how deep a city would have to go to survive. It did not answer the harder question underneath it. Was the city buying survival, or was it just buying time? The clock is still running, and the next decision may matter more than any tunnel ever could. The 2026 renegotiation of the Colorado River Compact is the inflection point that water managers, climate scientists, and 7 state governments have been quietly dreading for years. The 1922 agreement that divided the river was built on measurements taken during some of the wettest decades in recorded history. It promised water the river could not reliably produce even then. More than a century later, with the basin running hotter and drier than at any point in the modern era, those 7 states must sit down and decide how to divide a shrinking resource that everyone needs and no one can replace. How that negotiation ends will determine whether cities continue to grow, whether farms across the Southwest survive another generation, and whether the tunnel beneath Lake Mead ever gets truly tested at its absolute limits. Las Vegas is not a cautionary tale. Not yet. It is something more complicated and more instructive than that. A city that looked at an impossible problem and refused to stop engineering its way forward. The third straw is real. The conservation numbers are real. The tunnel sits 3 miles beneath Lake Mead right now, pulling water from depths that no drought in the recorded history of this basin has ever reached. That is not a small thing. That is extraordinary. A monument to what a city can accomplish when the alternative is running out of water entirely. But Las Vegas is also not unique. It is simply the most visible city on the most visible fault line of a water crisis stretching across the entire American West. Phoenix is watching the same lake. Los Angeles draws from the same river. Farmers across Arizona and California irrigate fields with the same allocation the 1922 compact promised, and the Colorado River can no longer consistently deliver. The engineering marvel beneath Lake Mead was built to solve Las Vegas's problem. It was not built to solve the basin's problem. And the basin's problem is getting worse. The snowpack will not always return. The lake will not always recover. One exceptional winter does not rewrite what the tree rings have already recorded across 1,000 years of this river's history. The megadroughts came before. The civilizations built on this water disappeared. The ruins occasionally resurface from the retreating lake bed as a quiet reminder of exactly how this story has ended before. The third straw bought time. Time for conservation to scale. Time for policy to finally catch up with physics. Time for the lake to breathe again. Whether that time gets used wisely is no longer an engineering question. The tunnel is already drilled. That decision has been made. The desert is still winning, and it has never been known for its patience. Lake Mead's crisis is not a Las Vegas problem. It never was. It is a signal, visible from space, readable in the rings of ancient trees, and measurable in the slow retreat of a shoreline that has been pulling back for more than 2 decades. The same story is playing out from Phoenix to Los Angeles, to every agricultural valley drawing from a river that 40 million people treat as permanent, and the data increasingly suggests is not. The tree rings do not lie. They have recorded this before. Megadroughts came to this basin, and the civilizations that depended on this water collapsed, vanished, and left behind only ruins that the lake occasionally resurfaces as it continues to shrink. Those ruins are not ancient warnings from a primitive world that lacked the technology to survive. They are evidence that this river, under sustained pressure, has a limit. And that limit does not care about compacts signed in 1922, tunnels drilled in 2015, or the 40 million people who have built their lives on the assumption that the water will always be there. Las Vegas built the deepest water intake in American history. The tunnel sits right now in permanent darkness, under crushing pressure, beneath the floor of a disappearing lake, pulling water from depths no drought has ever reached. The engineering is extraordinary. The conservation is real. The crisis is not over. Somewhere beneath Lake Mead's surface, the clock is still running. And the tree rings suggest it has been running far longer than anyone wanted to believe.